So you said you were like scrolling iTunes and you found me?
Yeah, just scrolling through I listen to podcasts all the time, and it just came up as on under iTunes, like podcasts you may like, something like that, and that's how I found you. I was
okay,
like,
that's cool. I'm always interested in how people find me.
For sure, yeah.
iTunes. About a month ago, I had a $1,500 mocha.
Okay.
Working at the coffee shop, phone rings, books out, put the phone down, take a sip of the mocha, put it back down, retract my arm, and knock the whole thing over on my laptop. So I just got this iMac, and I'm adjusting it in here.
Oh, I am so sorry.
Yeah, it was interesting too, because it's like 12:30, and I had an appointment at 1 out at this park where actually it's a football field, a turf football field that's connected to the park. So I rushed the computer to a repair shop that's in between the coffee shop and the football field, dropped it off, get back, heading to the gym. I was hoping to watch the Nevada game. I have a nephew at Nevada Reno.
Okay.
So, missed the whole thing. 2 days later, they tell me it was over with. It's done. And like, what do you think I should do? He was like, it'll be $800 in parts plus maintenance. If I were you, I'll just buy another one. So I decided to invest in the iMac, upgraded my iPhone, and got with that came the iPad.
Okay.
So I haven't played with an iPad in probably like 3 years. So
yeah, no idea.
Stuff. So you had heard my interview, I think, with Sean Jenkins, and what was that? The myths and fallacies of women in strength training. And
yes, that's
what you think of that one.
I mean, I thought it was awesome. You guys started a conversation that was necessary, and Sean was clearly very educated in the history of females in sport, and I loved all that. As well as it was very interesting how he brought up some of the discussion that has been surrounding females in terms of Q angles and perhaps increased risks of injury around your menstrual cycle. And that's the stuff that I really am interested in, because there's a whole biochemical component to that where, yes, that is something that we have prior thought, but once we actually look into the research, we realize, whoa. There is so much variability between females that is this type of research that we're doing just further increasing this dichotomous thinking of men are this, females are this. When we actually look at the results and we say, okay, some females may have a larger Q angle, other females may not. So when we actually look at the injury risk studies or the rates in which these injuries are occurring, we can't really assume that all of these females that have suffered an ACL injury also had a larger Q angle.
Right.
As well as you can also not say that, yes, when we look at the studies, most of these girls were in the follicular stage of their menstrual cycle, and that's when the ACL injury occurred. It's probably because of the higher estrogen. When you stop and say, okay, but when you actually look at studies performed on females, when we look at what occurs in the menstrual cycle, there is so much variability in terms of day 1 to 28. That's textbook. Some girls, your period may not come until day 35. Your follicular stage may be so short. So you may actually be in that luteal phase. So again, when we look at this research, you have to stop and hesitate and think, I love the premise of the studies, but we have to remember the world in which these studies are occurring. And
correct.
It's just, again, just more perpetuation of this dichotomous idea that females are in this mold and males are in this mold, when in fact, instead of looking at gender, I believe we need to start looking at other things like initial level of fitness. We're talking about athletes here. Let's look at just initial levels of strength. Because I don't know about you, but I've seen a lot of men that are either super muscular or not. And the same can be said for females, right? There's some that are super muscular and some that are not. It doesn't really depend so much on being male or female as much as it depends on your genetics. Some kids are just genetically gifted and some are not. But it really has less to do with male, female, XY chromosomes than it does genetics. So that's where I feel those types of conversations are necessary for us to start, but at the same time, we have to hesitate and think, Are we furthering this idea that men are suited for sport, are always going to be the best athletes? Females, we have, we're working against some odds, when really, are we? And even when you look at studies of females, we respond to strength training the same. So why do we keep this idea that males are the superior athletes and females will always take that step down and we will never be quite as good, when in fact, science tells us, actually, that's not so true. So that's what I kind of took from that. And I love that conversation, because I was like, yes, this is the conversation that we need to start having, because it's like, let's start questioning these studies, these ideas that we have been fed in school for years. Let's stop and think, okay, let's look at these sample sizes. Let's look at who's conducting these studies. Let's look at the actual research question itself. And that's where I feel like those types of conversations are so essential right now in this world.
Right. I wanted to, while you're on the roll, why don't you tell my audience who you are, what you do, and how you got into the fitness industry?
Of course. So I'm Emily Pappas. I am the founder of Relentless Athletics. Relentless is a company driven by science that specializes in the development of female athletes. We provide both educational and training services in the realms of strength training, sports nutrition, and sports injury rehab, specifically for the female athlete. Every head coach at Relentless has a master's of science in either sport physiology or athletic training. Because all of us are so passionate, all of us females are very well educated and very passionate about creating a change in this world, and that we'd love for all the girls to train with us. But at the end of the day, we just want to educate females everywhere on the essential component of strength training to being an athlete, male or female, it doesn't matter. You're an athlete. And then we want to start bringing to light these myths that we have been told for years on years on years. And it's time to start bringing some educated voices to try to debunk these myths, because it's time. It's almost 2020. So that's kind of the premise of what Relentless is. I'm a big science nerd. I was that girl that was sitting on the bench for years. I was actually, I was in graduate school in preparation of, I was getting my PhD, and I had this awesome opportunity to work with Division I female rugby players. And not a single one of these girls were exposed to the weight room until college. And that for me, I was like, whoa, wait, what? Because the physiologist in me was like, why? You play a physical contact sport. All of you girls keep getting injured. No one told you the importance of strength training. And from then I realized there are so many cultural and societal implications that are surrounding the realms of being an athlete and entering the weight room, that's really inhibiting these girls receiving a tool that they need to become the type of athlete that they have the potential to become. So that's why I decided. Go ahead.
I want to, not to cut you off, but you had me thinking of something. So say, typical story, scenario, case study. Mm-hmm. 7th grade athlete, has a ACL surgery, gets cleared from rehab. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say her physical therapist found me, but that's kind of what happened. Mm-hmm. Went to the website, thought we were a good fit, connected the family with me. Just so happens where my facility is on the other side is a physical therapist clinic. So I was able to let the other therapist know that she would be in good hands. Mm-hmm. She just got cleared to where she's been training with me for about 2.5 months now. Okay. Got her back from doing body weight squats, body weight RDLs, to now she can play with the 30-pound technique rogue bar. Mm-hmm. We had started her off on the 15-pound technique bar doing deadlifts and RDLs, and now she's playing with, I think that's a 30-pound bar where we've been able to put a few 10s on each side. Mm-hmm. What would you say to the family now that she's cleared about playing on a youth basketball team now? Because I don't like it. I would rather have her with a skills coach and continue to do the strength training and conditioning. But you being a woman and you specializing in female athletes, would you care to speak to that?
So that is something that is so necessary to have a conversation about, because that's why we also have a sports injury clinic within Relentless, because our biggest thing is we want to help these athletes and parents understand when you are cleared, your doctor, your physical therapist are saying you are now at the same level of physical fitness that you were at prior to the injury. But here's the thing. That's the level that you were in that predisposed you to getting that injury. So yeah, you're cleared, but you are now at the same chance of having that injury or another injury occur again. So we have to stop and think, well, why did that injury occur? Keep it simple. The level of stress exposed to your body was higher than your body's capacity to handle. So what do? Now that you're cleared, you're at that same prior capacity, but it clearly wasn't high enough for the stressors that you were exposing your body to. So what we have to do is improve that capacity. And the only way to do that is through strength training. So in terms of getting back into competition, I also agree. Why would we put you in that state where you were in before, where you got injured? Rather, we need to keep improving your level of fitness, improving that capacity. You can work on skills. It doesn't mean don't play sport. It means don't compete in sport, because competition exposes your body to that much of a higher level of stress. So with that, I agree. Just because you're cleared to play, I don't believe that that's the same as being cleared to compete. Because when we do that, we fail to educate that athlete on, why did you get injured in the first place, man? And this is something that we have control of making sure it doesn't happen again or reducing the chances. So I completely agree. It's time to have that conversation, but keep it simple and say, okay, you were cleared, and now you're at the same state you were in before. Are you willing to now expose your body to these stresses that you now may get that same injury or another injury, and then we got to keep backpedaling.
Yeah, and that's what I told her, because I'm like, you're in the 7th grade now. We're not concerned about playing a bunch of games. I'm concerned about where you're going to be at in 9th grade, in 10th grade. Don't worry about playing a whole bunch of games now. And I'll be honest with you, her being in, I'm sure you've seen young girls like this. She comes in, doesn't talk to nobody, and just does work and is happy to be there and thrives off being around the older kids. And I'm sure you've seen this before. I actually had her demonstrate a goblet squat yesterday. And I had like 9th and 10th grade basketball athletes that can't even do a freaking goblet squat because, as you know, it's the PE teacher that's running a strength training class at the school, and it's horrendous. I'm going to get belligerent with that right now, but she is about 90% good as far as like not having valgus knees, but I see on when squatting or landing on a jump. And I started her with just like basic drop jumps from a 6-inch box, and then we graduated to a 12-inch. Then we started her to where she can jump up to a box and do a few multiple jumps. But I'll see it because I have an eye, and that's why I know she's not ready to play. I'll see it from time to time, and I'll have to remind her. And I'm like, if I have to remind you, you're going to be doing this on the court when I'm not around. And who's to say what's going to happen when you have a body leaning on you or landing on you?
Right. I mean, with that whole valgus conversation, I will say that is something that we are very particular in helping our athletes understand that there's no such thing as terrible movement, that if you do this movement, oh my goodness. Yes, you may have a higher propensity of getting injured if you assume that position, but at the same time, we have to stop and think, keep it simple, man. Is she aware of her body? What's going on? Are we strengthening the muscles around every joint? Because you can't inhibit what type of movement's going to occur. We know what happens when a body gets fatigued. So at the end of the day, yeah, valgus may occur, but this doesn't necessarily mean that, oh my goodness, now we're going to tear an ACL. Valgus happens all the time. Some people, it's just a movement pattern. And I don't want to have these athletes being fearful of having a certain movement pattern occur, but rather it's all about having them understand, are you aware of your body? Are you aware of what's going on when you land? Or do you feel how to absorb force? So with all of that, that just tells me if that type of stuff is occurring more so than not, we just need to keep improving that body awareness and overall strength, because like we like to tell our athletes, strength training is not just muscular. There is not just muscular components being trained here. There is such a large neuromuscular component.
Correct.
And that we have to train our body to move. You're not just innately know how to feel certain muscles and how to get them all to contract at the same time. That's something that we have to train and develop. So that's what I would say for these young athletes, especially in 7th grade. We have these conversations with those parents. It's like, your player development is a pyramid. How well of a player depends on the base of your athletic development. And if we're worried about how well you're playing as a player right now, prior to establishing the base, your pyramid is only going to get so high in it.
I agree.
And then what's going to happen by 12th grade? So it's all about, okay, we need to keep establishing that athletic base. Yeah, love your sport. Have fun. Improve your skills. But we need to remember that we can't work on everything at once. And our main priority right now needs to be improving that athletic development. All of those physical and neuromuscular characteristics that we can train right now that will allow you to then improve those specific skills relating to your sport later.
You know, speaking of strength training, I'm a favorite of teaching the Olympic lifts. I'm a favorite of teaching the regressions and progressions of power lifts, especially to females, because I've seen like they'll come in and say, we don't want to lift. We don't want to lift heavy weights. We're afraid of our daughter getting bulky. I'm like, it's impossible at this age. And she doesn't have the same amount of testosterone as boys or young men. That's not going to happen. So I've been kind of tricky, and I can start a kid off with a PVC pipe, and then we can transition to bands. And then when they see other kids that might be a year or two older, and they're like, I want to try it. So then the next thing you know, they really get to liking it, and then they hit new PRs, even if it's just 50 pounds or something like that. You know, we live in this mythical age sometimes of if the woman lifts or the young girl lifts, she's going to get bulky. So how do you feel about that? These myths that probably go back to the 1900s and with societal norms and things like that.
Without a doubt. I mean,
you're probably supposed to be in the house, probably serving somebody right now.
Oh yeah. My job is to produce children, right? that really was that's when we think back of the early 1900s, when we saw the separation of males and females in our gym classes, and males had coaches and females had physical educators, because females were taught to not be competitive because those were certain traits that weren't okay for a female. And instead our job was to acquire skill. And I think that's actually pretty funny and also very interesting, because we also utilize a lot of Olympic lifts because, one, it's my sport and it's something that I fell in love with because it's a sport in itself. And it's literally the best tool you can give to an athlete to then improve their athleticism and then become a better player in any sport that they play. But with that said, it's a skill. And most women are very interested in detail. So when we have a girl come in and she's like, oh, I'm afraid of getting bulky, first we stop and we say, okay, one, we don't like that type of conversation, that type of thinking, because some girls may genetically be more gifted and have a little bit more musculature. Other females may not. There is no, every female who lifts a heavy weight is going to get bulky. Rather, we say the composition of material on your bones really depends more so on your nutrition. So that's a conversation we can have later. But when we think of lifting weights, we're not lifting just to add mass. We're going to add maybe 0.5 to 1 pound of mass a year. Doesn't sound too bulky to us. And then on top of that, don't forget about all of these neuromuscular adaptations that you're getting. You have to learn what your body is doing, develop that coordination. So when they tell us about that bulkiness, we stop and we say, all right, I understand why you think that. I was taught that too. It all comes down to, do you know the difference between bodybuilding and strength training? Those women that you may see that are super bulky, to each their own, but they got that way on purpose, probably with some outside factors. But they did that because their sport depends on that aesthetic look. Your sport does not depend on that aesthetic look. Rather, your sport depends on the qualities that we can develop through strength training. So that takes years and years and years and years. of dedicated practice work and maybe some extra exogenous hormones to achieve that look, and for them to each their own. For you, that's not our goal. Our goal is rather to get you to a certain level of athleticism that then we can take those characteristics and apply them to your sport. So that's how we try to have that conversation, and that we're not even going to say like, oh no, it's not going to say, all right, let's stop and think this through. And just because we don't like that all girls are supposed to look this way, all boys are supposed to look this way. I don't know about you, but putting muscle on is hard, but I wish I could put on a little bit more muscle. So it all depends on the person, but we say, okay, we only want to help you reach your goals. So what is your goal? If your goal is to be a bodybuilder, yeah, you might get bulky because your sport depends on that look. Your goal is to be a soccer player. We need to make sure that we're first developing that athletic base so that you are strong enough to then use that strength and produce higher force outputs that allow you to run faster, kick more powerfully. Most scientific studies show that females need to squat around 2 times their body weight. I'm going to say that, in my opinion, very few females are entering the Division I realm squatting 2 times their body weight. So until that starts happening, then we can start having that discussion. Are you getting bulky or not? Because let's get to that prerequisite level of strength that we've determined is necessary to then have those results, those characteristics that we have just achieved through that strength training. Then we can start talking about if you're bulky or not. Then we can start maybe pulling back of that heavy weight once you get there.
I have one, the female athlete that I was discussing earlier. She has a younger brother. I think the brother's in the 5th grade, and the dad was asking me, actually the mom and dad was asking me, could I start training him? And I'm like, he could wait a year or so. I mean, I could start training him now, but I don't like the age disparity because most of my kids are like 8th grade to high school. And then like I let them come for a week. I just wanted to check their daughter out, see if she really liked the training, see if she liked me before I made an exception. And I did, but I'm not with your son. He's 5th grade. I have 12th graders in there. And then I have, when the summer comes, college kids come in, and I just don't like the age disparity. But I tell people, I could train a 6-year-old. All they have to do is be able to listen and follow instructions. Lifting too young, is it dangerous? I wanted you to speak to that.
That's a huge one. I always bring up in 2008, the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Sports Medicine and Fitness released this updated statement saying that strength training is not only safe, but a beneficial modality for children and adolescents who engage in sport. So I always talk about, if your athlete is ready to participate in competitive sport, we now need to prepare her body for the stressors of that sport.
Yes.
If they are not participating in that level of sport and they are just having fun, and if they want to come in and learn and have that maturity to want to learn movement patterns, let's go for it. It's not dangerous. Quite frankly, it's beneficial. The earlier you learn how to move, the better. But the whole idea of things stunting your growth or being dangerous, again, comes from just years and years of misinformation and perpetuation of all of these myths that strength training is so dangerous and it's going to just going to inhibit my daughter from looking the way that she should when she gets older. When it's like, do you know how much stress your daughter is exposed to on that soccer field? Every time she runs, think her body weight times gravity times the velocity of her movement. That equals a whole lot of force, a whole lot more force than that girl is ever going to get exposed to in this gym right now when we first need to learn movement. So that's kind of how we
what's interesting about that is there's actually more injuries in soccer than there is in football.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny? Exactly. But that, for me, kind of helps support my bias that, okay, when we look at the differentials between the amount of females exposed to soccer, males exposed to football, how many of those females are introduced to the weight room? How many of those football players are introduced to the weight room? Is it because soccer is now such a more dangerous sport? Or is it because we are not preparing those athletes for the stressors of that sport? Is that why the risk?
I agree. And one of the issues that I have with the soccer community, especially at the younger level, is because they have club soccer, then they have select team soccer, and there might be futsal. So and it's one of those sports where like, I know out here in Oregon, I'm in Portland, Oregon, you don't get recruited in high school. You get recruited from your club team, being circuit or whatever. But
same here.
There's so much pressure to be in the Timbers Academy or this AAU or a select team that they don't allow time for strength training. If the kid has to get faster, they're telling the kid you have to get faster, but they're not allowing the time to do that. And it's not always sprint, speed, agility, quickness drills. A lot of them is to get over your speed barrier, you have to get stronger.
You gotta get stronger. Exactly. That's where I feel comes to that education component, where it's like I pull myself back and I think, if I'm a parent and I don't really understand the science of strength training, why would I take my daughter to the weight room if she needs to her coach keeps telling me she has to get faster? That's when we stop and we say, okay, we have this conversation with every parent, every athlete when they want to join our facility. And we say, well, one, we have to look at your training load. How many hours a week are you devoting to sport? All right. And we look at it and we say, all right, you're never allowing your body. When are you actually going to work towards your goals? Because I don't know about you, but like LeBron James, I don't think that he is constantly performing and doesn't give himself that time to get better, especially during his developmental stages. Right now, most of his hard work is done, and that he just gets to showcase his athleticism.
Correct.
Are we building, or do we take any time to build that athleticism? So that's when we start to explain, yeah, your daughter wants to be faster, but think simple physics, man. The speed in which you can move your body depends on the amount of force that you can produce. Force is dependent on strength. So we have to get your body stronger to have those higher outputs. But we also have to make sure that we're doing it at a time that allows us to build these athletic qualities. And that's when we have that conversation, is that, okay, you're playing high school, club, and then you got your indoor, and then you have all of these camps. Well, when's the time to get better? You tell us, because we're not going to tell you, yeah, come in 3 times a week when you're already participating in 20 hours of sport a week and you're in 7th grade. Okay, let's stop and think this through. And normally when we bring that up and we ask the parents, how many hours a week? And they stop and they're like, I never thought of it that way. And I'm like, well, I think it's time, and that's how your athlete might be getting injured and may not be performing because she's just so fatigued, because you never give her that time to actually take a step back and recover. And that's like our biggest focus on that education, and that we need to have these parents and coaches understand that there's a time to perform and there's a time to prepare.
Now, listen, speaking of education, for the parent, what are 2 to 3 books? Not that we want to turn parents into coaches and have them do our work, but what are some books that you could recommend that would give them better information on the people that they might find to hire to work with their kids? What are 2 or 3 books that you might have in mind?
So most of the books that I really delve into are all very research-based, because that's my bias, and I'm an adjunct instructor, and I teach a course on strength and conditioning for the female athlete. So my number one resource is Strength and Conditioning for the Female Athlete by Keith Barker and Debbie Sargent, just because it brings to light in a not super scientific way, but helps parents and coaches understand why strength training is so essential for the female athlete. Another one is the young female athlete, and it really starts to talk about why are all these injuries keep occurring at these increasing rates for these young girls? What is the injury? What's the basic physiology behind that injury? And what can we do to help reduce those chances of it occurring again? It also really brings into discussion the female athlete triad, REDS, menstrual cycles, all this stuff that I find is extremely important for coaches and parents to become educated on, because if you have an athlete that is missing her period, she's at an increased risk of injury because this is bone development time, and she's not developing her bone. So we need to start thinking about this and having a conversation, and not thinking this is a taboo subject. No, someone has to talk to her about it so she can learn.
Right.
Like, how is she going to know? That, and then my other new favorite is Sex, Hormones, and the Female Athlete, because it talks about that stuff, and that just keeping it simple. Like, do you even understand what's going on inside your body? And when your period happens, when you're trying to get stronger, because I feel that knowledge, again, is power. And that when we actually stop and think about all of these myths, is it dangerous? My daughter, her period's all messed up. Put her on the birth control pill. Okay, stop. Let's think what's going on here. Let's educate ourselves before we start making these decisions. But the basic one is my favorite, strength and conditioning for the female athlete, because it really talks about the seasonality of sport, athletic development to player performance, what fatigue is, what recovery is, those different recovery modalities, what actually matters, and nutrition practices, even coaching the female athlete and how the psychological nature of coaching females on average may be a little different than the average male. That's one of my favorite books, just because it's about time that we start having textbooks that bring to light these conversations that we need to start having.
As we get into the fourth quarter, what else would you say to the young female athlete, the sports parent, and maybe even the young coach that's working with the female athlete as far as helping them or educating them to better prepare the youth that they're working with that happen to be young women?
In terms of just one preparation, I like to explain that there's a difference between working out and training, and that male or female, we need to understand that you need to have a goal, and we need to progressively work towards those goals with back off periods. You cannot work 7 days a week. You cannot only work when it's preseason time. You need to have a plan that you follow. With that said, there is no specific exercise that is so necessary for the female over the male. All of that stuff are just great marketing tactics to get you to believe that females are different than males.
I don't even want to get started with that.
Exactly.
That's a whole other conversation.
That's a conversation in itself. Yes. So with that, keep it simple. We need, male or female, we need to prepare our bodies for sport. If you want to compete in a high-level sport, look at every single college, NCAA, let's look at all of these different college programs. Every single team in some way or another is getting into the strength room. So for males, if we look at, most males are introduced to weight training prior to college. Most females are not. That's a discrepancy that we need to start decreasing, because if we see an equal participation of men and women participating in sport, we should therefore also make sure there's an equal opportunity for both athletes to be prepared for their sport. The end, male or female. But with that said, we also have to stop and think, is this discrepancy because lifting is more perceived as a guy thing? Women think they're going to get bulky. Isn't lifting dangerous? All of these things we have to stop and say, yeah, we have to start having these conversations. But at the same time, I believe that when in high school especially, and we have all of these guys, their sports teams, they're like, okay, you go to the weight room. Girls, you can. We need to stop making it an option. We need to start saying, give equal opportunity, because if you say all of the boys always get the weight room at this time, maybe we'll try to make room for the girls, right? Then we are perpetuating this idea that strength training is for men and strength training is maybe for a select few of women, when it should not be like that. You are an athlete, you need to get stronger, you need to prepare your body for sport. So I feel like when we just start evening the playing field in that manner and saying we need to start explaining to these athletes, to these coaches, that you need to train in a manner that prepares your body for sport, and strength training is the only way that can help reduce the chance of injury, and on top of that, improve your performance, we need to start giving it to all athletes, male or female. And with that, understand that most females may be a little intimidated. And that might be something right now because we live in a world where strength training is perceived as a male thing. So we need to make sure that we are speaking to them and understanding this feeling that they have and taking that step back. And that's why we have an all-females facility, because we want to reduce that intimidation factor. But we want them to know how to move their body so that when they leave, they can go to any gym and they feel confident knowing what they're doing, because we eliminated that first hesitation And now once you teach a girl that, hey, you can get stronger, she's going to do it anywhere. And once more females start seeing that other females are doing this, we're just going to see that snowball effect. And that's what I'm just trying to help be a part of.
Now, what I want to ask you is, and this is definitely for my audience, where can they learn more about what you do? Like what's your website, or, what is that?
Our website is relentlessathleticsllc.com, and our Instagram is relentless_athletics_.